didn't start yet.
What is your name?
Zachary Conan.
What is your name?
Zachary Conan.
What is your name?
The Master by Paul Thomas Anderson. That's what we're discussing today. Me, Zachary Conan, and David. And, oh boy, this is a wonderful film. 2012. It's probably my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson film, and I used to be a huge Paul Thomas Anderson fan. He's one of the directors who got me to fall in love with cinema a lot more. Especially, he used to do commentary tracks, and he used to do really in-depth behind-the-scenes for, like, Magnolia and stuff like that. And basically, on each of his films, he would draw aesthetically from a certain school of filmmaking, and he mastered, like, each one, at least in an imitative form. In The Master, he at least took the school of filmmaking that he was shadowing, that he was gaslighting, because it is a masterpiece of that, and really transformed it into something a bit more powerful than what we would normally associate with that school of filmmaking. So his first film was Hard 8, or Sydney, and this is all by his own admission as well. So Hard 8 was all about the French New Wave, all about Bob Le Flambier. Basically, that film is the school of Jean-Pierre Melville and Nouvelle Vogue. And then his second film was Boogie Nights. And Boogie Nights is Martin Scorsese. And his third film was Magnolia, and that was Robert Altman. And then his fourth film was Punch Drunk Love, and that was as well within the New Wave, but more within a Jean-Luc Godard idea of New Wave films. Then his fifth film was There Will Be Blood, and that was extremely Stanley Kubrick. And then his sixth film, The Master, was, I would argue, intensely aesthetically derived from the poetic language of Terrence Malick, and he would probably admit to that as well. I haven't heard him speak too much on The Master, but that's what he normally does. He is a chameleon when it comes to his own film language. He does have certain motifs that is reoccurring. One of those motifs is actually Philip Seymour Hoffman, who every film I just named, every single fucking one, Philip Seymour Hoffman was in. He loved Philip Seymour Hoffman. It was his most loved actor. Philip Seymour Hoffman and John C. Reilly are probably the two favorite actors of his. And, of course, watching this film really brings the feels, because we lost Philip Seymour Hoffman February 2nd, 2014, when he overdosed on Ace of Spades heroin after being clean for a long time. And watching this film reminds you of just how, if there was a master, if there was a true master, it was him. The master of acting, masterclass. And since the film was filmed in 65 millimeter, and we have actually three powerhouse performances: Joaquin Phoenix as Freddie Quell, Philip Seymour Hoffman as Lancaster Dodd, and Amy Adams as Peggy Dodd. Three masterful powerhouse performances, the best I've seen all three of those actors. But you get to see every tick on Freddie Quell's face. You get to see every bit of emotional acrobatics that Philip Seymour Hoffman balances with ease. Every outburst, every pore, every inch of sweat on his face. Peggy Dodd, you see every inch of sincerity in her face. Misguided sincerity. You see every bit of romance, of appeal from Amy Adams. And kind of a dangerous intensity, or a dangerous false sincerity, or true sincerity. It's very dangerous, but I'm going to flip it over to David right now.
So what I really enjoyed about this film was not only the scenic and wide viewing, so that allowed for those details to be captured, especially in the close-up shots. And I also had a lot of a deeper sense that Paul Thomas Anderson was trying to communicate something deeper than evaluating sort of a pseudoscience. He was trying to really get at something more human, something that really predisposes us as people to certain biases. He was really showing us, like, the different kinds of thinking, specifically how fearful thinking can lead to dangerous ideas, can lead to dangerous lifestyles, can cause a lot of turmoil and strife in a person's life, and it doesn't matter where that source of fear and fear cultivation comes from What matters is us being able to recognize that. And what Paul Thomas Anderson really does here is he fleshes out not only the subtle and hidden ways in which that that fear-based cultivating thinking comes from, but he also goes all the way to the very violent. And he shows this throughout the film in different juxtapositions. He does it in a sexual way. He does it in a non-sexual way. He does it in so many different ways, subtle ways, just like the way in which people have and throw parties and the way it's done there, the way in which it's done on an individual and a very psychical level, in a very harrowing interviews. And it's also done in a sort of a wealth kind of way. Like, you want to be associated with that. You want to have that reputation of being in with the group and feeling that kind of sense of belonging. And then even that is twisted and manipulated by this fearful based thinking. Really, what it is cult, right?
Absolutely it is.
And not to make the mistake that this film is a cult classic or anything like that, but to delineate and say that this movie is about cults and about cult thinking more specifically. And then it's even more than that. And so that's what I really enjoyed about this film.
Absolutely. What I enjoyed, first and foremost, is the humanity of the picture. But really, the composition was extraordinary. I loved that I didn't recognize any handheld used. So when they're going through the desert, when he's running through fields, they obviously built tracks for which the camera could dolly through, right? And even that implies the scope of this kind of picture. It is called The Master, and it is incredibly precise. As we mentioned, a 65 millimeter film. So that means that everything has to be precise. Everything has to be that much more orchestrated, that much more controlled. So I thought it was absolutely incredibly put together. And when I showed this movie to David, I didn't want to kind of alter his viewing of the film by telling him immediately that it was a thinly veiled story about the birth of Scientology, the early stages of Scientology of L. Ron Hubbard, specifically, because I didn't want that to alter the viewing, because I think it stands perfectly fine on its own laurels without having to have that as well. But it just makes it more sophisticated. And so far as Scientology goes, I've actually been processed through Dianetics like twice, because you see them outside of stores every once in a while, or downtown, and I can never pass up someone who claims they could save my soul. I always give them a chance, always give them the opportunity to do that. And, held the metal bars in my hand, and they all tell me that I need a lot of work. But this is a really great picture, and it's probably Paul Thomas Anderson's most intense emotionally. We go to a lot of very intense private places. One of the scenes that stands out is Philip Seymour Hoffman in the bathroom, and Amy Adams, who I'm really happy I got to watch it again, because the first time I watched it, I was just enthralled by Joaquin Phoenix and Philip Seymour Hoffman, the work that they were doing. But this time I got to pay more attention to Amy Adams. And in that scene where she goes in there and gives him a hand job while while giving him business advice, while telling him that he has to quit boozing, while telling him that in order for our organization, for our science to be credible, then we have to act with honor, and gets him off to that idea.
What I would like to dive board off of that and say that this is also a sort of not a cursory, but a sort of like a touch on a part of the human condition, in which we have not only a pattern-based thinking that we like to do, but we also like to build stages, okay? And it's much like a beaver dam, and where we look and we appreciate a beaver dam, it actually takes years and years of work for that beaver to make, or those beavers, to make that particular dam. And this is a lot how cult-based thinking starts. And
Yeah.
he knew, Paul Thomas Anderson knew that. And so what he did in that particular scene, which I found really amazing, was that he knew that basically Amy, who's playing
Peggy.
Petty, yes, thank you. She is basically like that. She is building a dam of her own facts, her own interpretations into this particular scene, and she's trying to imbue that into another person, and that's a lot how cult-based thinking starts.
She really brought it too, because she hypnotized me this time when she was saying later on in the film, like, what color are my eyes? Turn them green, turn them blue, turn them black. Like, I went with it too, so I started staring at her eyes, and she was so good. The what do you call it? Because her voice was full of sincerity, but also hollow at the same time.
Yeah,
and
like a shallowness.
Exactly, and Amy Adams just naturally kind of like radiates there's a strangely innocent quality or pure quality, so it adds to the insincerity of the entire cultish organization.
And you want to believe it too. You want to believe what she's saying.
And you also want to believe, because Paul Thomas Anderson is also raising an argument of like, for someone like Freddy, is this harmful? Like, is he better off with these people? And then, is the cult better off with him? Which is, the answer is no.
Right.
Absolutely not. But Lancaster Dodd would not agree with that.
That's pretty interesting that you said that, yeah. So what I found really interesting, and I really love Joaquin Phoenix and his performance as Freddy, what he really does and what I really enjoy is that he's able to make me believe he really is a drunk. And I don't know if he was actually drinking on the set or not. That's how good it is.
He's pretty method. He might be.
Yeah. He might, maybe. And that's like, not only that, but like the way he sweats, the way he moves, you know, he just has that sort of, that enigmatic kind of persona where it's just so surreal that it definitely seems real.
Of course.
And then that allows for that immersion. And so I got immersed into Joaquin's performance, and I identified with him a lot in many respects, especially in one of the beginning scenes when he meets up Lancaster Dodd. Freddy is standing in the doorway, and there's that beautiful shot, really, where, and that is reoccurring, by the way.
Yeah, that was a great introduction to his grammar, is the doorways and the curtains too, because he frames characters in between openings or archways.
Yeah, and so it's like you're seeing that Joaquin Phoenix, really, Freddy is very skeptical of even meeting this guy Lancaster Dodd because he doesn't know him. But then suddenly there's that connection in that dialogue where they're like, I felt like I've seen you before kind of thing. Yeah. And so then that kind of pattern thinking as well as that connection is being used. And then that's kind of the way in which it's introduced. And Freddy does step through the door. So.
Absolutely. Like my favorite example of that kind of framing is... it is during that sequence where Amy Adams is making him change his eyes. It's when they're finally trying to just pull emotion out of him. Like, you know, you are not ruled by your emotions. You're not ruled by your emotions. So essentially Lancaster Dodd is having Joaquin Phoenix walk back and forth from a wall to a window and trying to have him describe it over and over again until he stops responding with feeling. But Freddie Quell is a man of nothing but fire and feeling. But there's one point where they're having like lunch on the veranda or whatever, and Joaquin Phoenix is still going back and forth, and PTA frames the shot of Lancaster Dodd at the head of the table through the curtains in the window. So it's literally the man behind the curtain. So even when PTA goes literal with it, it's still gorgeous. It's still absolutely beautiful. And the scope of 65 millimeter makes even an intimate, closed shot like that just seem massive. Everything seems massive about this film, which is great because it's not necessarily the film that you would need the kind of scope that comes with 65 millimeter, but the emotions and the authenticity is often so explosive that, it's a film that needs to have that kind of grandeur.
Yeah. So there was a particular scene that I wanted to bring up where Lancaster Dodd is talking to Freddy, and he uses the word aberration, right?
Yes.
Specifically.
And Freddy Quell doesn't know it.
And yeah, and he does, and he brings it up, and so this is really phenomenal for me. For that particular moment, I realized that Paul Thomas Anderson was talking about a cult.
Yeah.
And I think that was, 25 minutes in?
25 minutes in.
Yeah.
He lets that linger for like another 15 before the character finally says the word cult to him. So it's the only time it's spoken, I believe.
Yeah. So this is really fascinating here and into the mind of cult thinking, because that's actually a part of the cult-based thinking. It's an aberration from the normal sense of responsibility. You want that kind of homely and loving feeling of, having a house and you're safe and you're warm and you're protected. And that is the aberration that twists from that and creates that cult thinking was put in there. And I know Paul Thomas Anderson put that in there on purpose, that word. And you said he was a writer, wasn't he?
He wrote the movie. He's a phenomenal writer. This movie is unpredictable. It's structured in one of the most unique ways that I've ever seen. Paul Thomas Anderson is, if not one of the best modern filmmakers, he certainly is one of the best modern screenwriters.
Yeah. And so this is really interesting that he used that word, because Lancaster Dodd was trying to be sort of a fatherly figure for Freddy Quill.
Yes.
And then that actually evolves into its own thing, because this is, in cultish thinking, this is called recreation. And that's basically where the cult is trying to imbue itself into the mind of the thinker that it is this safe and warm, loving home that's going to help you in your life. And so that's what I really was like blown away when he used that word aberration. And then it just kind of like manifested, and you see this sort of like interview process happening where it's like basically the foundation of Dianetics. And again, I didn't even know this was about Scientology the whole time. I definitely got the distinct feeling it was about cults, and it was about paranoid delusions and how they can go really haywire and come up with really bizarre and false conclusions about trillions of years of living and having past lives.
So I didn't want you to know it was before we went into it,
And I'm very appreciative of that.
It is information you should definitely have, but I think after the fact.
Yeah, after the fact, it's more of one of those. So it's just something that I just really enjoyed that you did that, and that I was able to make all the connections.
Yeah, I wanted you to enjoy Lancaster Dodd as Lancaster Dodd, as his own character, unattached to something that preconceived notions of anyone.
Yeah, and that's very important, because there's a lot of people who will kind of try and demonize people like L. Ron Hubbard. I mean, they did pioneer this idea of this cult thinking, and it is dangerous, and I'm not denying how dangerous it is. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I recognize that, it's now considered a religion, and there's probably people out there who do get some benefit from Scientology, on some pseudo level. And it would be better if they consulted other sources, obviously. I think that needs to go without saying, but if they did consult another source.
It's actually really duplicitous of PTA, man, because, Terrence Malick has a lot of pseudo-Christian mystical tendencies in his films. I love Terrence Malick. I think he's brilliant. PTA obviously feels the same way, and he borrowed a lot of Terrence Malick's language and dialogue to tell this story. Interestingly enough, this story, if Malick has an argument throughout most of his films, be it Days of Heaven, Thin Red Line, Tree of Life, if there's a solid argument that Malick repeatedly tries to make, it's that it doesn't matter if something is true. What matters is that it should be true, because humanity is for the better if we behave as if it were. So PTA is being really duplicitous here by using the language of basically a Heideggerian Christian mystic to show us, no, just because something is true does not mean that we should, just because something is is untrue but is well-intentioned does not mean that it should be true because of those intentions. So he uses this very spiritual, very intuitive language established by Malick to kind of retort artistically, give a rebuttal to Malick in his own way. And it's a deeply powerful, I think, very strong rebuttal. If I like to view it that way.
A strong rebuttal to
Terrence's overall argument of that humanity needs mysticism, essentially.
Yeah.
So Paul Thomas Anderson is using Malick's own language to tell him no, that mystics are contrived people, that mystics are insincere people, and that mystics are animals just like all of us. And if you can't help the animal, if you can't help man at his most primal, then your mysticism is useless.
And I'm glad you brought up that word, because Joaquin Phoenix's role is basically that of the animal.
Of course.
So the fact that you're stating the obvious and you're connecting that straight to the movie is a very valid, very, very good point.
Everyone could be changed if you were Sean Penn and Jim Caviezel, but the world is mostly made up of Freddie Quells and Lancaster Dodds. There's masters and there's servants. And there's those who refuse to have masters, but will always be servants to something.
And that's another masterful stroke by Paul Thomas Anderson, because that is one of the elements of cultish thinking, is dependence upon a leadership, having a leader, having followers. You see this a lot in the movie. You see the crowd constantly clapping, doing that clapping and having that sort of reliance.
That's one of the most powerful parts of the film is Lancaster Dodd's admission that even he has a master. Well, he implies that he has a master by the last time he and Freddie speak. He says, so go on. If you ever figure out how to live without a master, any master, you'll be the first man in human history to have figured that out. And tell me how you did that.
Right.
Which implies that he, too, has several masters.
That's pretty interesting, too. And you do see that. You see that he's, even though his wife literally does that somewhat grotesque scene of jacking him off.
Amy Adams blew me away, man. Everyone was fearless in this film. Every single person. And the fact that she was pregnant through the majority of this film, except for the final scene. Also, I guess that's actually where I'm getting what I was talking about earlier with the, not innocence or purity, but maternal. She's the matriarch of that cult, and that's the one that I connected to, So if I were to be brainwashed, it would be through that sort of archetype, actually.
You gotta watch out for that.
It is good to watch out for that.
Yeah, that's good. That you recognize that is amazing. So, no, definitely kudos to you. Another thing that I've studied about it is... you do see that Joaquin does Freddie really does take on that role of making other people compliant to the cult. That is another element of the cult thinking that Paul Thomas Anderson knew about. And then there's also... But
it's fascinating because, just to spend one time there, he's very defensive, very protective of his master, of his like a dog, of his Lancaster Dodd. But he's never read his books. He doesn't actually know what they're saying. And then when they're in the prison cell, and Lancaster is literally, he's not saying the word Thetans or Xenu or anything, but he's saying words like, "We were invaded. You were once a pure human, and you were invaded by these things that made you fearful." And even Freddie Quell is going, "You're making this up. Like, no one, your son doesn't even like you. We all know you're making this up." So Freddie Quell doesn't even believe in what Philip Seymour Hoffman's saying throughout the film, but he's making people be compliant.
Yeah, there was another scene which I found incredibly chilling and captivating. It was the scene where Lancaster Dodd was typing up the book, or at least the whatever, and then Petty is talking to him, and then she is literally in this sort of terrified way explaining what she thinks might happen to the whole world if we don't win this war.
Well, she's one of Lancaster's masters. Not at any point in the film is she submissive to him, but he's submissive to her several times.
And that's a good point too. And what I find interesting about that, though, is that she came from a position of both terrifying fear and self-righteousness.
Absolutely. That is her,
and that's her character and her persona, because
that's her persona in the intimate moments where she can be who she actually is.
Right. And you do see that. You see that again and again when you see Lancaster Dodd being basically criticized and put as the charlatan as that he is by Moore. You see that Moore is questioning him and that social situation, and that he blows up at Moore because he's being questioned. Yeah, that is a very well known scene. But that's part of the cultish thinking too, is to not be critical of the leader or anyone who thinks in that cult.
Absolutely. Why do you think Freddie Quell liked Lancaster Dodd so much, and vice versa? Why do you think they liked each other so much?
I think it's because it's like one of those things where you have someone who's almost a polar opposite of you, and you're just captivated and mesmerized, of how much different they are, and you want to know why.
God, yeah, that final scene just has so much power. I want to know how long it took PTA to write the final time that all three characters meet each other, because you get amazing lines of Amy Adams kicks things off. And she is terrifying, and she is everything you said. She's everything right there. She has wonderful lines like, if you're in this for 1 billion years. It's not a fashion.
Yeah.
And she leaves. And then Lancaster Dodd has amazing lines of, or they have an exchange of, maybe we'll meet again in the next life. If we meet again in the next life, you will be my mortal enemy, and I will show you no mercy. And then, of course, I'm gonna take you on a slow boat to China.
So creepy.
And I like to view that. It's so creepy, especially since that's like the last time most of the public will ever see Philip Seymour Hoffman, too.
Yeah, sad to hear that.
So it has like multiple, one's accidental and one's just poetically beautiful. So that scene is just amazing. And if we meet again in the next life, that scene is really, it takes on metaphysical dimensions only because of what happened to the actor shortly after that film wrapped up. Mm-hmm. So it even has that kind of, they call it movie magic, the stuff you can't plan for. It makes the film that much more powerful. But, gosh, what did you think of one of my favorite sequences? There's not a whole lot of meaning involved in it, but there's a whole lot of great acting, staging, and choreography, depth of field choreography, truly. When Freddie Quell is watching Lancaster sing a song for a party, and then Freddie imagines all of the women are naked, and that's really where it drives the idea home that he doesn't just want like good, like cute pussy. He doesn't just want like attractive women, because every woman in that room is naked, and there are women of all different body shapes and all different ages, and they're all being exposed, and they're all clapping while Philip Seymour Hoffman is dancing around. But PTA frames it in such a nice way that I almost feel like I wouldn't be surprised if Lancaster was imagining the same thing, because it's followed directly by Amy Adams going like, you can do whatever you want, just I don't want anyone to know about it.
Wow, I didn't think about that, but that's pretty sinister and possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of creepy. What I thought about that scene, though, because you did ask that question, was, oh man, it was chilling, because I guess for me, because I've seen cults and how cults operate and how they kind of evolve. I've only seen it from like a second person perspective. I've never been involved, thank God. But what I found really chilling about that particular scene was the fact that Lancaster Dodd was really doing something brilliant. What he was doing was he was making this sort of this memorable, homely experience, this party. He's the life of the party. He's someone to be idolized. He's someone to be revered. And then I guess the message I got from that was, not only is Freddie a little bit of a pervert.
Of course.
and I'm putting that lightly a little bit. But also because it was showing that he was dancing with the naked women, and I was just like, wow, this is, what if the women actually were naked? Would they still dance with them anyway?
Right, yeah.
So that's kind of how that's the impression I got off of that scene.
And even then, in Freddie Quell's imagination, Amy Adams remains, for the most part, sacred. She is naked, but the only thing you can see is just her pregnant belly. Her breasts are actually covered, things like that. Like, so even in his imagination, he still can't see her. Because that's like the one woman in the entire film that, one of the few that he doesn't even imagine in a sexual way.
Yeah,
because she's established herself as the matriarch.
That's a good point, because that's true. It's just interesting to me how it was just, and not only that, but also the fact that this whole situation is coming from that sort of terrified matriarch's perspective, with that overly religious, and then the fact that Paul Thomas Anderson, he had to have known that.
Yeah.
So the fact that he included that just totally erases any possibility of misogyny.
Of course. Oh, yeah, didn't get that at all from the... last week we did, you heard me and Craig do Perfect Blue, and I had a few problems with the way that film portrayed women. This film, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You know, it's a deeply sophisticated and understanding film.
Because not only is she given the power, the ultimate kind of that last say, because the whole conversation at the end between Freddie and Lancaster is shadowed by her opinion.
Yes, and her opinion is final.
And that was amazing. So definitely not a misogynistic tone or anything at all in this film.
She's the true master. If there is a master of that organization. Good Lord. And I wanted to ask... Well, I actually just wanted to point out, to go along with them, because it is an important message, and I appreciate that you're talking about the different characteristics of a cult, the different... the anatomy of a cult and how it operates, because... it's wrong to view this film as simply a thinly veiled... It's not simply, even if it were, just a thinly veiled film about Scientology or L. Ron Hubbard. Because I got some strong feels from people who are in the public, the public sphere right now, when he was having to defend his views against John Moore. And he kept saying, like, why did you ask the question if you already know the answers, you pig fuck? Like, I do feel like Jordan Peterson is like 5 weeks away from calling someone a pig fuck. Like, no, I mean, cults are still very much alive and active. They just have to operate in different ways. No one's going to come out and say that they're a cult. That's not how cults get larger. That's not how they propagate.
That's very true. And I would like to just make a final point about this cultish thinking here. And what I find fascinating about it is a lot of people in the modern perception, in the modern public, they imagine a cult as being something this removed, this detached, this third or second world country where it's happening. But not only is that not true, but this movie shatters that illusion completely, because it's being taken... the shots are being taken in a first world society amongst, first world, wealthy class citizens. And then they also identify with whatever, but they want you to kind of be a Christian, kind of like pushing that a little bit. And they're preying off of that kind of Christian thinking, because they know that there's that sort of like religious zealotry that a lot of other religious people will have. And it's not a bad thing to be religious, it's just a bad thing to be so dogmatic to the point that you can't even think for yourself, kind of thing.
And that's why they call it a science throughout this film. Right,
right, exactly.
They don't call it testaments, they don't call them scriptures, but data.
Right, and it's data, and it's final, and there's more data, and so then that's what changes.
Yeah, that's the other scene where Lancaster loses control of his emotions and is ruled by them for a sentence. Is when Laura Dern asks him about the new book and why they changed the wording of a sentence from "Can you imagine" to from "Can you recall" to "Can you imagine," because she feels, and she's correct, that completely changes the meaning of the question of how the person is supposed to either recall or just fictitiously imagine things, and kind of presses the issue, but not too aggressively at all. She starts it off by saying, it's a brilliant new book, but then that's her only question about it, to which Philip Seymour Hoffman has an outburst of, "What is it you want?" We get 2 scenes of him losing his... Well, 3 scenes of him losing his shit, if we want to include him screaming Freddie's name when Freddie takes off on the motorcycle. True. Philip Seymour Hoffman was, so dominant of his emotions in this, and you could tell he was one of the finest screen actors of his generation because of just how much he was able to open up. Like, everything was perfect. He knew just how much to express, to emote, and then turn it down. There was not a single emotion he didn't intend for you to feel in that wonderfully put together performance by
Yeah, and what was really chilling about that is just the reality of that possibility, and also reality of it actually happening in first world countries like where we live in America and abroad, and that was just a very potent truth. And not only did it speak to that, but I wanted to get away from that, the whole fact that there is a message, an underlying message, a thinly veiled message, as you put it, about cult thinking. But moving away from that, I really enjoyed Joaquin's Phoenix's performance, because what he's doing is he's just really bringing out the idea of, like, what does it really mean to be a human? And having this wild and untamed and animalistic nature to us, and then you're immediately juxtaposed that to, well, humans aren't animals. They're not part of the animal kingdom, even though we are. And that was just really awesome that that Paul Thomas Anderson was able to get Joaquin Phoenix to be able to embody that.
So. Oh, absolutely. Joaquin has always been such an authentic actor, and this is probably his most authentic performance for me, because it's so unpredictable to the sense that he is so good, he is so authentic, that I feel like even he's just doing shit on the spot. Like, he doesn't even know what's happening, because he's so fucking good at authenticity in this role.
And then he's also, like, wrestling with the three cops on the patio.
Yes.
And he's really going to town, and you really think he's wrestling.
And you know before it started, he's like, all right, just letting you guys know, I am gonna, like, attack you. So, like, you put me down. Like...
And you have to handcuff me, because I'm not going to stop.
Which makes Philip Seymour Hoffman's performance, I think, easier for him as well, because he's like, oh shit, Freddy, don't hurt him. Like, I feel that there was a lot of authenticity in on all three of the main roles here, in their own ways. Oh gosh. Also, this was the second film. For the longest time, PTA had John Bryan doing the music for him, who did wonderful scores for him. But in There'll Be Blood and in The Master, he brought in Johnny Greenwood of Radiohead to do his scores, and Johnny Greenwood is even better than John Bryan, which is insane to think about, considering that John Bryan's amazing. Johnny Greenwood's score in this is even better than his one in There'll Be Blood. That he really gets, because that's where you get a lot of the paranoia. That's where you get a lot of the eerie. It's actually an eerie score. It truly is.
And I definitely felt that sense of, like, there's something dark happening under the surface.
Exactly. Like, incredibly good score, incredibly talented composer. I really like him a lot.
And I also wanted to talk about Paul Thomas Anderson's understanding of the human condition for fear, and just exactly how fear manifests itself. And it does it in scales. And he represents that throughout the film in different layers. And the first layer, I would probably have to say, is more like a doubt and an uncertainty. And so you do see that in the beginning scenes of the film, when Lancaster Dodd is being questioned by John Moore. And he's really just, like, already getting outraged by the doubt being raised by Moore. And then the second level of fear is that sort of hesitation, and you see those happening in the still shots when there are characters like Joaquin Phoenix's character, Freddy, at the doorway, wondering whether he should enter or not. There's that, and then that turns into sort of hesitation, which is the third level of that fear, and then that can evolve very rapidly into caution, and that caution can turn into a perceived threat, right? And when you have that perceived threat, then that can devolve even further into terror, and that's kind of like the fourth scale of fear. And then you see that represented in that one scene when Amy is talking to her husband Lancaster, Petty is talking to her husband Lancaster.
Peggy,
excuse me. And then that is again ramped up into the fifth scale, which is not just raw terror and panic, but paranoia. And then that is represented again in...
it is really paranoid, but it's subtextually paranoid.
Yeah.
Like the atmosphere is a paranoid atmosphere for me. I like it a lot like that. And felt like you had more to say.
Yeah, and I wanted to keep going and just say how he was able to masterfully work that into the film and show how that is something, our fear, I should say, is something that we need to pay awareness to. We need to respect it for what it is, that it can be used as a tool for survival and for thriving and to getting to a better place in our life, and to not have other people dictate how our fear should be used or not used, how we should really just try and be more intuitive and try and really respect our fear for what it is. If you're hesitant towards someone who you might think is a pseudoscience, or they might be a pseudoscientific in their viewpoints, and you do feel that hesitation, you should intuitively accept that. You should accept that fear or that hesitation there. And that's a healthy way. That's a healthy skepticism. Whereas there's that unhealthy skepticism where everything else is to be feared and the whole outside world is terrifying and we must be in this home. And that kind of unhealthy skepticism, Paul Thomas Anderson knows. He knows very well that you shouldn't have that kind of unhealthy skepticism. So that's very important. And then that leads into into just the human condition of just freedom, and how freedom is one of those things that can liberate you and just make you escape and take a motorcycle for 4 hours down one direction to escape, yes. Right? And that freedom is a way to get out of that fear-based thinking. So that having that value and having that scene was so, to me, incredible. And that was very, very potent message.
Absolutely. That's the uniqueness of PTA's range as a true prophet of the human spirit, because Freddy doesn't leave them in a huge knockout, drag-out fight. He leaves them unexpectedly. He leaves them literally in the dust. And Lancaster Dodd is also a man who is pretty empty inside. He has to fill something. He has masters. What does he see in Freddy Quell? What void does he need Freddy to fill? It's the fact that Freddy is free to do whatever it is he wants, including get on a motorcycle and just go wherever he wants to.
Yeah, and what's really sophisticated about this movie is the fact that PTA knows that not only is freedom a way to get out of and to be liberated, but also he's definitely saying you should have reasoning. He's not sending the message that reasoning is a bad thing. In fact, he's saying the opposite. He's saying reasoning is a good thing when you use it and you cultivate it and you pay attention to experts and expert witnesses and expertise and different skills and knowledge that people have. And you do have to rely in some real way on expertise, because we can't be masters and omniscient. We can't know everything. And so he knows the landscape, really, is what I would say. He knows the landscape of what is healthy and what is not healthy. So I also wanted to talk a little further, if you don't mind. I wanted to talk more about just the idea of freedom and how Freddie Quill is so masterful in being able to embody that, his character, and how Joaquin Phoenix really brought that to the movie in a very unique way. Just as you said, he's leaving him in the dust because Freddie Quill, I don't think his life was for the better having met them. I think it was probably for the worse, because he went right back to the way he was at the end of the movie, didn't he?
Yes.
And so it was just one of those things where it actually became an impasse. And what would Freddy's life have been had he not met them? He would have still been the same free-spirited person that he was in the beginning. And maybe even then, he would have actually appreciated more intelligent thinking and intelligent thinkers, because he wouldn't have been inculcated into thinking that intelligent people are to be despised.
Yeah. You're taking a character that has no psychology, no philosophy outside of a hedonism that even he is not cognizant or aware of, and if you identified it, he would call you a fucking moron that he wants to fart in your face, that he's not a hedonist. He's nothing. He's just free. He is the free man. You cannot offer a free man salvation. It means nothing to him because he's free.
And that's so beautiful that you see him just going off into nature and on a motorcycle like that, because it's just like a human with sort of a machine below them that is able to free them, and that is kind of like the catalyst for reason. And that was just such a powerful, like, I guess a metaphor, really.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to just like go off of that and then move further into just like what it really means to be free. Being free is thinking for yourself. And Freddie, despite having that intimacy, he was so dependent on them for quite a while, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And he was able to still escape even from that level of dependence. I know many people who, if they were inculcated into a cult or cult-based thinking, that kind of person probably would never escape because they'd be so dependent.
But the thing, well, he's dependent in very practical ways, because there's it's roof, it's roof and board, it's food, and it's a father figure as well, and it's a family which he doesn't have. So it's in those ways. But like we've said, he never once did he give you the notion that he even understood the philosophy of the pseudoscience that he was a part of. Not once did he understand it. He took it as slights against his family from people who would criticize it, as opposed to a slight against his salvation, because he didn't put any value in that. When he was giving out flyers, handing them out on the streets, like, no one would take it from him because he was kind of creepy looking, and at the same time there was no passion in his voice. It was just like, I'm doing this for my family.
I would like to ask you, where do you think, if there even is a message of salvation in this, where does that lie in this particular film?
I don't think that there is one.
Okay.
But I think that PTA's message behind that is that that's okay. That that's fine. Terrence Malick is a man who likes to tell you there's salvation.
Yeah.
Even if it's not real, there is salvation. There's salvation in some sort of quest.
Right, so not
but
at all.
PTA is telling you that you're okay.
Yeah, you're okay being, animalistic and accepting your own hedonistic desires, because that's still more preferred than pseudo-intelligence.
And also, and if we can even look at the remarkable acting, the remarkable authenticity in that acting as reflecting PTA's overall message as well. You're okay. Strive for authenticity. Be who you are. Even if who you are is an animal. Because look at him smiling. And I love that he bookends it as well. In his very primal, animalistic way, the film is bookended by its opening and closing line. Hey, do you know how to get rid of crabs? Is the opening. And the closing is, oh, hold on, it fell out. Let me stick it back in. So PTA is even saying, like, boil it down to your base urges even.
Yeah.
It's okay.
And I think that's a really powerful message, too, because he's also communicating the idea of having your own independence.
Yes.
And that is very powerful, because that is the way in which someone can be free, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that just only adds to that. So that's really good.
I mean, because Lancaster Dodd is a prisoner within a prison that he built for himself.
And, he is in prison in more than one way. He's in prison socially and through his reputation. He's in prison monetarily. He's also imprisoned by a familial level at that point. Of
course, yeah.
So that's pretty terrifying to think about.
Amy Adams is the warden, most definitely.
Yeah. Oh.
Anything else you'd like to say?
Overall, I would just like to have some closing thoughts here on just my overall impression of the movie. I'm really glad I saw it, and what I found the title to be particularly poignant, because who is the master? Who are the masters?
And is it possible to live without one?
Yeah. And having that sort of philosophical sort of inquiry is, I think, a very healthy thing.
And would we be better without a master?
Yeah.
Because then we wouldn't have passions. In a way.
Mm.
One of Freddie Quell's masters was sex.
And you do see that the whole, I guess, the master-servant kind of...
dynamic.
Yeah, thank you. The dynamic there is, if you do have masters, then you have to obey and be compliant, and then you also have to sort of like sell yourself out, right?
Yeah.
You have to be what they want you to be. And that's not a way to live. That's not an authentic life. That, as Socrates would put it, that is an unexamined life which is not worth living.
Absolutely. Whew. David, why don't you go outside, have a cigarette, while I read this love letter here.
Okay.
Some criticisms I wrote back on July 14th, 2015 for Letterboxd. And we're gonna do a little countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, and a 1. Cue the music. I've been saved more times than I can count. I've never passed on a good baptism. I've given my soul to many different faiths, as many as I possibly could, and I've been loyal to each deity, or lack thereof, for as long as each ceremony lasted. I've been born again, I've feasted with the Hare Krishna, I've worn the tefillin, I've given my secrets to an e-meter, and I've taken acid in an attempt to cheat enlightenment by outsmarting the precision of the accepted path. I've scaled the 10 Sephirot with rabbis and Gentiles alike. I've hung with the mystics on Haight-Ashbury, selling them my loyalty for powerful crystals and spares, cigarettes, bus tokens, and oral legends, and I have also dined with atheists and priests, receiving a holy communion from both. To the varied act of spiritual cleansing, I was once a sponge. I believed that the soul was a multifaceted extension of the physical body and that it took many different belief systems to satisfy the many separate and unique dimensions of the spirit. I also loved unbearably. I was a faith-based hobo in the Abrahamic tradition. I immersed myself in these religious communities just for the raw experience of the people involved. When a man tries to save your soul, to open your eyes to his God, he loses place of himself, giving every ounce of emotional courage to you. The only act more intimate than that of spiritual cleansing is the act of sex. Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master is a film about that intimacy. I was once many different things, but I was never Freddie Quell. I was never an animal. Paul Thomas Anderson is the kind of artist that has more in common with a graceful chameleon than a boastful lion. In the course of his impressive career, Anderson has assumed several different identities and worn several different artistic hats, that of Martin Scorsese, Robert Altman, Jean-Pierre Melville, Stanley Kubrick, and Terrence Malick. What is most outstanding about his brand of assimilation is that by mirroring all of these different filmmakers, Anderson is honing a craft that what might someday be the ultimate filmmaking. He does not make replicas. He produces lyrical expansions of pre-existing formats. The man must have a terribly strong spirit, for all of his films overflow with the ethereal. Paul Thomas Anderson is the kind of artist that has been able to redefine film for the 21st century by re-examining its established techniques and fine-tuning each of them into an ambiguous array of fresh possibilities. He is the kind of artist that world cinema needs right now. Philip Seymour Hoffman was the greatest actor of his generation and personal emblem of mine. He was the kind of performer that transported you into the world of whatever film he was acting in. Philip Seymour Hoffman was a genius. He was a king among kings and a master of men. He was simply one of the most incredible talents ever photographed. His loss still stings deeply. His death was an unbearable and tragic event. The modern arena of screen acting collapsed on February 2nd, 2014. It was a chemical obliteration of an unspeakably brilliant artist. Hoffman was the kind of actor that transcended the medium of film. He was the kind of actor that absorbed you. He never changed the world, but he changed people. I was one of those forever altered by Philip Seymour Hoffman. In the Temple of Spirits, his is the most powerful light. Watching Philip Seymour Hoffman act is an out-of-body experience. Watching him perform is one of the ultimate gifts of art. Lancaster Dodd needs to legitimize the cause. He needs to tame the animal of Freddy Quell, and taming the beast of Quell, Dodd might also be able to tame himself. The Master is a film about rabid intimacy. It's about mental sex and the homoerotic domination of will. It's about the carnal submission, both physically and intellectually. It is a film about psychological coitus, about two people experiencing infinity and intimacy, and it's not about consensual, wild brain sex. That's what it's about. It's about the salacious nature of faith. It's a love story about the Master and his servant. This is the torrid, passionately epic love story of Lancaster Dodd and Freddy Quell. Every living thing in the animal kingdom serves a master. This is the story of the one creature who refused to kneel and the powerful suitor who gave the beast his unmerciful soul. It's about being mentored into disbelief, into emotional and physical oblivion. Lancaster Dodd is Freddy Quell's master, and Freddy Quell is Lancaster Dodd's. They worship each other openly and strongly, as intimately as soulmates, as intensely as past partners and future enemies. The journey, the spiritual intersections that have joined Dodd and Quell together did not begin with the events in the Master, and it certainly doesn't end with a slow boat to China. This is true love or true hate, a true experience either way. The ultimate kind of passion through the ages. The Master being the presentation of the middle stage in their spiritual path. The Master documents the fork in the road between two souls destined to clash. The last moment of peace between them is one of the most emotional bits of cinema I've ever seen. When next they meet, they will destroy each other. The next life will be about animosity and torture. The Master told of the life that was filled with the final chance at friendship. The Master is unbelievably intimate and powerful. It is composed more lyrically than There'll Be Blood or Magnolia, prosaically in an almost Mala-confused way, while remaining unique to the inherent oneness of a film about spirits with a palpable, deeply soulful pathos. It was cultivated, much like a cult. While it may be a thinly veiled expose or attack on the Church of Scientology, Paul Thomas Anderson is far too bright to devote his film entirely to commentary. The Master is a film about soulmates that find not love but future wars. The Master is a film that is much larger than it seems, with patient takes and a generous amount of moral ambiguity. Paul Thomas Anderson focuses on the cause, unconcerned with the legitimacy of the movement in favor of the authenticity of its charismatic leader. The Master is an abstract entity that requires an involved conversation with the viewer. The Master is symbolic interactionism at its most sociologically micro. It's about defining the soul by conjoining two separate ones. It's a treatise on sex and believing. It's not about forgiveness, it's about the ride. The Master is a genius film that I consider to be Anderson's best. It is an unending masterwork, and Joaquin Phoenix is the kind of actor movie lovers dream about. Brilliant doesn't even begin to cover his abilities. He's a phenom. Phoenix is a brave actor of tremendous craft and a seemingly endless amount of skill. Under the direction of Anderson, his talent truly flourishes. The Master gives us Phoenix at his most unhinged and raw. It gives us two of the best performances of the 21st century. Hoffman and Phoenix will live forever within the frames of the Master. They will sing and scream, dance, wrestle, and love, and embrace for all eternity. The Master is a film about the power of coincidence, a recurring motif in Anderson's works, but it is with the Master, with the providence of chances fully realized and developed, having mastered serendipity. Paul Thomas Anderson can now finally close the book on happenstance. Paul Thomas Anderson perfectly captured fate and mastered its visual complexity of reasoning. I am reminded of the mystics I met in San Francisco. I am reminded of the unique intimacy of a group religious experience. I never once found God or anything resembling spiritual understanding. What I found were people that already understood the infinite question, and just being around them seemed to generate a knowing sphere for me to walk through. The Master is a film about the collision of two souls. It's about the preordained trajectory of them, the consequences of their meeting. My life is about the same thing. Sometimes I know the answer to the infinite question, and it's not something you can analyze or articulate. It's something you have to experience over and over again before it begins to make any sense. The Master is a film that I always wished for, but I never thought I'd see. It tamed me, it consumed me, it wowed me, it soothed me, it mastered me. Oh, subscribe. That article was longer than I remember it being, but I stand by it. Subscribe, like, comment, and share. Thank you for watching.